Vietnam, 1965, a concrete cell, no windows, no timeline. Vice Admiral James Stockdale has been shot down over enemy territory. He's in what soldiers call the Hanoi Hilton. He's there 7 years. He watched men break around him, but not what you'd expect, not who you'd expect. It wasn't the skeptics that died first. It was the optimists. We'll be home by Christmas, they said. Christmas came. Christmas passed. We'll be home by Easter. Easter passed. Stockdale watched them die, not from torture, but from a broken heart. He survived by doing two things at once. He had unshakable faith that he would get out, but he also had brutal honesty about today. He called it the discipline you can't skip. Faith without honesty kills you, but so does honesty without faith. Gentlemen, today we're talking about positive thinking. Does it work? What does work? John, there's a Harvard and Boston University study that you got some insight and done some research on?
Yeah, 2019, Harvard and Boston University had 69,000 women and 1,400 men. And when they studied this, they based the groups into quartiles based on optimism. And the most optimistic group lived 11 to 15% longer than the least optimistic group. And they had a 50 to 70% greater chance of reaching the age of 85. And there's a lot of caveats in here that we know based on the science. It's not just optimism. So that type of optimism won't work with just anybody. And it's not baseless optimism. It's optimism with a plan.
That sounds pretty good to me. They live longer, right? I mean, that's what I hear, right? The most optimistic group lives 11 to 15% longer, more than a 50% chance of living to 85. Like that seems like a pretty good reason to be an optimist.
I mean, it's true, but know thyself, right? Like there's other stories that were in science behind the fact that if, there are people that have kind of a more pessimistic view on the world, and that pessimism drives them to plan and execute more effectively. When researchers have tried to get those people to be more optimistic, it has actually lowered their effectiveness, lowered their all of the same markers in ways that it wasn't actually a good thing to make someone who uses that pessimism to their benefit. I think knowing what's going to work for you matters a ton, and being able to kind of, in a cognitive behavioral way, find the best output for yourself is really important. Generally speaking, I think optimism is better when it's grounded optimism, not baseless optimism. That's where we were talking before the show about WOOP, which is the idea that you go through and you make a plan. That's the P in WOOP, right? We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later.
I love your acronyms. Tell me what this WOOP is.
Well, WOOP is wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. And to be fair, you're the one that sent WOOP to me.
Yeah, I sent it to you, but go ahead.
Yeah, but Wish Outcome Obstacle Plan was in the 2026 Journal of Social and Personal Relationships just last month, and it was 105 couples, and it was a behavioral observation. And when you look at this kind of field of research with behavioral observations, which is a scientific method for looking at optimism, I mean, the data is very strong. Right now, it's not a double-blind study; it doesn't have the same rigor as that, but it's really, really strong observational evidence that shows, like, generally speaking, being positive, having an optimistic outlook is better.
I don't think anyone would deny that living your life with a fair amount of optimism is better than, we were talking earlier about doomerism, where in today's society, we have enough doomerism that people actually know what it is, and is perhaps spiraling people in a direction that is not the healthiest. Healthy for one thing, for sure. To be depressed is obviously not healthy, but having a doomer mentality kind of sucks the life out of you and sucks your initiative out, and woe is me type of thing. But, we were going to talk about, the Antarctic expeditions of Scott and Amundsen, and the two vastly different approaches, and building on the WOOP. Scott was an admiral in the traditional English sense in the early 1900s. A vicious and strong leader. Command and control. we're gonna get this done. We'll fight through anything, and was far less. He was prepared, but far less strategic in his thinking in terms of what he was undertaking versus Amundsen, who really, it's interesting. We all discovered this WOOP today. They both had the same wish, which was to get to the South Pole. They knew what their outcome was going to be. They had the vision of the outcome. We're going to get there. We're going to get there healthy. We're going to get, and then we're going to be able to come back, right? But when planning it, Amundsen really planned for the obstacles. He used a different type of clothing. He picked a shorter route. He built numerous supply depots on the way so that when they left, those supply depots would be there on the way back. He was primarily focused on reaching the pole first. Scott, on the other hand, wanted to get to the pole, but he wanted to do mapping and exploration. He had this different set of distractions. The leadership style was, Amundsen was pragmatic. He would be the type of leader today that was kind of an all-inclusive person that took feedback well and worked as a team, where the other guy was more dictatorial and so forth. But the point of all this is there are different ways to leverage your optimism. And a Pollyanna approach, it's been scientifically proven. And if people want to dig in a little deeper on WOOP, they can go to the WOOP.com website. There are a number of double-blind studies that they've done since this was published with people trying to lose weight, with young kids taking tests and so forth. There's a lot to be said here about having, a kind of a linear outlook on accomplishing the goals that you want to accomplish, and not just sitting back and saying, being a cheerleader on the sideline of the Texas-Ohio State game and thinking that Texas is actually going to win. Doesn't work that way. There needs to be a plan.
But let's go back to POW camps. I think, Viktor Frankl wrote a really famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, and he talked about the optimist died. He also talked about the pessimist died. He talked about it was the realists that got through, the people who were going to make their suffering meaningful. That's a different form of optimism, maybe, right? Where you say, I'm optimistic that my suffering here is going to mean something afterwards, whenever that happens to be. The baseless optimism has to be kind of separated from the optimism where it shows an actual goal. And then I think, having that plan matters a ton, right? And Viktor Frankl was really, really clear about that. And I think, Colonel Edward Hubbard in the Hanoi Hilton, he was not in the Hanoi Hilton, he was in North Vietnam somewhere else, but he was in captivity for 2,400 days in Vietnam, told a fascinating story when I met him 30 years ago when we talked about it, wrote a book, Escape from the Box. I think it's really about whether that optimism is baseless or not baseless. And if it's a grounded optimism in a plan and in reality about the obstacles and a sober view of the world, I think it really helps a ton.
Yeah, I don't want to. Hang on. No. You hold on, Randy. I just don't. What John said about the Frankl book, I don't want to hand wave over that. Every single person that in my life I have given this book to, I think I even gave it to our peer group at one time. I think it's one of the most important reads a human being should undertake. I don't care if you listen to it on tape, read it on a train going to work or whatever. It is so substantive in terms of its messaging that it should be required reading multiple times by everybody on the planet. So I just wanted to take a second there, because
now that we can get you off your soapbox, can you finish your Antarctica story, please? Because we don't know who lived and who died and who made it.
Well, okay. Amundsen got to the pole first. His ship was destroyed in an ice flow. The entire ship sank. They were able to get the dogs and the whatnot off the boat. Scott, on the other hand, got to the pole, but died on his return. Amundsen did in fact return. It was an incredible story of trials and tribulations to do so, where 4 men got in a rowboat and traveled several hundred miles to what they were hoping would be a bit of civilization, which they did in fact find, and were able to send ships back to where they had left the original crew members. It's a fantastic story, and again, I strongly recommend people read about them. An interesting thing about Stockdale, an optimist who, was being brutally honest about his circumstances. Later on in life, I don't know if you guys know this, but he ran for vice president on the ticket with Ross Perot. And the reason I bring that up, Ross Perot, in retrospect, was a real character, and people kind of made, a little bit of fun of him. He was one of the first technologists of his time. He was the guy who said at the passage of NAFTA, you'll hear a great sucking sound south of the border as all our jobs move to Mexico. But anyway, Stockdale was such an optimist, and he believed in the future of the country and of himself and what he could bring to the table, that he ran for vice president, which I think is really interesting. From the Hanoi Hilton to the presidential stage, is something else of an individual. Anyway, just that sidebar on him.
I think the implication is that Scott was a optimist and Amundsen was a pessimist, but I don't really see him as a pessimist, right? Like, he started out with hey, I'm going to make it, right? And we're going to do it, but I have to prepare for all these different things. And it's just a different approach.
Well,
right.
He outplanned Scott. Scott used traditional everything, the same exploration techniques that got him around the Horn of Africa and all the other wonderful accomplishments that he had. But he didn't adjust his thinking around the different obstacles he was going to face going to Antarctica. It's a very different mission. Where Amundsen and others, by the way, there are others who made it to the South Pole and the North Pole who used the same techniques as Amundsen to prepare to go there. It was thought out in a different way. Now, he could have thought it out in a different way and got it wrong, but he got it right. He did the right research. He took his time. He was slower. He left after Scott. It's a very different approach, but it obviously worked out.
Yeah, I think historians, as I kind of took a look at how historians looked at Amundsen, they called it defensive pessimism, but he was a planner and he didn't believe in luck. And Scott wrote in his journal, "I shall trust to luck." I think that really is maybe not any kind of notice about optimism or pessimism, but about the lack of a plan versus a plan. Amundsen brought 3 times the amount of food he thought he would need. There's just a different type of planning. You can be a pessimist with a plan, which has proved to be fairly productive, and you can be an optimist without a plan, which has proven to be counterproductive. I think optimism and pessimism are one variable, but I think you've got to look at the planning variable also.
Yeah, I think it moves past the title optimist versus pessimist. I have a wish, as in the W in WOOP. I have a wish. I know precisely, or I have at least a vision of what my outcome is. But then I'm going to stop and say, okay, in order for this to happen, what's going to get in my way? What do I need to prepare for? You could there's 100 military generals that had similar concepts to WOOP in terms of planning. You go back and read about General Patton and the way he prepared for battle and how he took things on. It's very similar to what we're talking about. There's more to it. I read a book a long time ago. God, it must have been 20 years ago, that juxtaposed several generals, but I'll never forget the striking difference of General Eisenhower, who became a president of the United States, and Patton and a couple more generals. Who was the guy the famous general of the Asia Pacific of World War II? Anyway, his name's slipping. I shouldn't slip my mind. Anyway, the difference was
MacArthur, I think, so you're looking for.
MacArthur. Thank you. MacArthur and Patton were very similar in the way they approached things. And Eisenhower was basically a CEO. He was, MacArthur and Patton, they were on the front lines. They never expected their men and women to do things that they wouldn't do. Their structure was at all times be ready to fight. Whereas Eisenhower was a planner, kind of a strategist, and it served him well to become president, but he wasn't the best field general on the planet. So there's nuance in everything you do. And it's the same thing in running a business. We've talked a lot about running a business, preparing a business to be sold. Do you even want to be in that business? And if you do want to be in that business, what are the obstacles to you being successful in that business, and what do you have to do to prepare for that? What are the contingencies that you need to have? What's your floor in terms of your expenses? All that is so important, and it applies to each of the 5 Fs. You know, we want to be healthy. What's our fitness goal? Well, okay, have a fitness goal, and then what are the obstacles to getting there? What are the options to achieving it, and so on and so forth? It applies to everything.
John, if we're going to get clinical here, it's, there's optimism of I will prevail in the end, right? Positivity, everything is fine right now. There's delusion. Everything will work out. I don't need to prepare, right? Can you be a realist and an optimist? Does
I
one
think so.
cancel the other?
Yeah, I think you can. I think that, this is where it's really easy to get tied around the axle in definitions. What is an optimist? What is a realist? Those are all characterizations, Randy. And you've heard me say many times, like, let's get into the grounded data rather than the label of optimist, pessimist, realist, whatever. It's like, what do you do? Do I have a goal? Right? Do I have a plan for that goal? Do I look at the obstacles and am I sober about the obstacles, or do I ignore the obstacles? I had this conversation with someone just last week where it was like, I understand the world as you want it to be. That's not the way the world is. It's 105 degrees outside and you run the risk of heat stroke. And so that's just the temperature outside.
Anthony, I think it was earlier, referenced some of these things about like the weight loss study, and some of the people that visualized and did the best job of it actually had the worst results because their brain actually all of a sudden was like, oh, I don't need to lose weight. I've already done it, right? The basic, that's oversimplification, but I don't know. This is, we've always heard about positive thinking, but now they're saying too much positive thinking can be a negative and actually slows you down.
I don't think it's not, I don't think it's about too much positive thinking. And I do believe that visualization is important, but when visualization isn't followed by planning and execution, like, it's got to be all those things. And that's where I talked about kind of the defensive pessimism that people talk about, not my term, but where people perform better by planning for the worst. And so, which, I wouldn't characterize that as pessimism. I would say that's preparedness. And I think there's a difference, but defensive pessimism is a term of art. I think that positive thinking and wanting the best possible outcome, but being ready for different circumstances makes people better in that crisis.
So from an advice perspective, what I would say is this to anybody listening. It's going to sound so trite, plan for the best, prepare for the worst, right? If you're on a health journey, as simple as a thing is, quote unquote, simple, not easy to lose weight. The plan is I'm going to eliminate this from my diet. I'm going to focus on more fruits and vegetables, but I got a Christmas party coming up and I know I'm going to have a problem there. That's okay. I'm not going to quit after I have a piece of cake or something at a party. I'm not going to let that derail me. And that's what happens a lot of times. It happens, you see it I saw it running a business, you run into a streak of our competitors are running some kind of offer that just, we're having a tough time overcoming it. And, for a week or two or a month, our sales efficiency dropped dramatically. And the sales team is, getting a little antsy or, depressed a little bit. Thank God for Pareto, because the top 20% of our group were able to overcome that more quickly than the 80% and eventually drag the 80% back up, right? Because they're prepared, they're understanding, and they came up with an obstacle killer, for whatever the competition was doing.
But there's a downside to that, Anthony, that people have to be like, I hear you, but the problem with planning for everything is there's also people that want to plan for every bridge they might ever cross, and it leads to analytical paralysis. That's why I didn't just say planning is important. I said planning and execution. Like I've told people, like, my bias is towards movement, right? My bias is not towards not movement. I think that when we try to boil it down to one variable, which people often want to do for understanding, we miss the picture. Why the WOOP thing was so great, right? It's wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. I wish they'd put execute at the end of it. right?
Sure.
Do. Whoopee. Oh yeah, I like it.
Yeah,
We're doing excellent execution. We're going to make a new plan called Whoopee.
we talk about though the people that plan, but there's something that, and we can't track this, but my gut tells me most people that get caught up on all the obstacles, it paralyzes them. And I watch this all the time. My experience is that yes, there are people that go, okay, I'm going to do this, and here's all the things I have to overcome. And that is sort of the best of both worlds. And most people go, I have to do this, God, but then I have to go to school for this, and I got to do this, and I got to figure out how to do this, and they just don't do it, right? And I think there's a little bit of a survivor's bias here, and I think for most people, being more positive gets them in the game. And there's some value to just being in the game. And it's different stakes. Going to Antarctica and having the freezing to death, starving to death have different stakes than even starting a business, which is scary enough for people. But
I think that's the thing, Randy. People oftentimes look at risk as being one thing, and there's risk stratification, right? The risk of someone living or dying is a different risk than someone not drinking water for 3 hours, which is different than not drinking water for 3 days. Understanding those risks and giving them their due is an important part of decision making that people hopefully learn as they mature their the mind that they need to make their professional and personal decisions.
Yeah, I don't want people to think that I'm saying in any way that maintaining a positive desire to reach your final outcome is really important. That if you lose that when faced with an obstacle, an unforeseen obstacle, which in anything you try to accomplish in life, you are going to run into an unforeseen situation that you were not planning for, no matter how much planning you did on the front end. But maintaining that positive, yeah, I still want to get to Antarctica. I still want to lose 20 pounds. I still want to graduate and get my master's degree. Even, I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to run out of money going to school, right? Whatever that obstacle is will help you get over that obstacle. It may be insurmountable. It could be, and you might have to quote unquote give up on that wish for a bit, right? Or deviate from it a bit, change it up a little bit. But you got, if you lose that positively and you become a doomer, okay, check out. I mean, you're a burden on society as far as I'm concerned. You're not advancing humanity in any way by quote unquote giving up entirely.
I want to take that, Anthony, and give some real world examples, right? Let me start with one that hits really close to home. I have a dilemma that I think Bitcoin is a solution and is one of the most positive things in the world, right? Like you want to talk about something that gives hope. The people I know that are Bitcoiners, they're having kids like crazy. They're expanding, they're growing businesses. They have hope. Yet we've talked about on this podcast many times, most young people don't have hope. They say, I can't afford to have a kid. I can't afford to buy a house. I can't, right? Yet that doesn't mean anything to anybody, and it doesn't convince or help anybody. And it starts like, I come across as doomerism a lot because I get into, we're 40 trillion in debt, and there's this, and these people in Washington, they get to print money and give it to their friends and buy votes and all of these problems. Well, that is kind of doomerism. However, if people don't understand that that's the real problem and they can't do the math of what means at 40 trillion and growing in debt and the interest on it and everything else, right? They're never going to get around to Bitcoin because they're not going to see that there's a need if they don't see that there's a problem, right? While I see it as the most positive thing in the world, it's hard because I don't know how to promote it without focusing on sort of, I consider it the negative or the doomerism, like to get people there. Maybe you guys can help me, but how how do you do that, right? Because one is necessary, and I look at it as the planning thing, right? I look at it as, okay, here's what's happening, and thank God we have a solution. Here it is. But nobody's going to take it. They're not going to grab the Bitcoin unless they understand that it is a solution to a problem that they don't know they have. What would you tell me?
It's a three-sided, four-sided dilemma, right? The people in power want to stay in power. In order to stay in power, they have to bring back to their constituents gifts and goodies, right? The new power plant, the new factory, the new whatever, the new social program, whatever the case might be. The people receiving those things aren't going to want to give up those things. You know, I mean, the economic fix is relatively simple, right? You know, our social programs have to be, governed, if you will. They have to stop growing. Our defense spending is literally off the charts. It doesn't need to be in terms of the percentage of GDP. You know, I mentioned Eisenhower. He said, beware of the military-industrial complex. That was 50 years ago. We have not learned that lesson. 60 years ago, we have not learned that lesson. So those things are standing in the way of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Go ahead. John doesn't agree.
With all due respect, I mean, those problems are real. I don't argue with any of those problems, but telling people those are the problem they have to solve is the reason they have no hope. My entire professional career for the last 6 years in particular has been about finding hope in broken systems. And what I can tell you is that if people focus on what they can control versus what they can't control, they can find ways to start finding wins for themselves, to move them toward the wishes and goals and hopes they have that are well grounded with a plan, instead of waiting for the system to be right for them to fix themselves. By the way, the system hasn't been fixed in the last 5,000 years. Everybody complains about the system they live in. Even in the golden age of the 80s, 15% inflation, the 90s, problems, 2000s, there's always some sort of problem where the system is imperfect. I accept that. I accept that there's been better times and easier times and harder times and less good times. But the reality is that a plan for an individual can work with inside of any broken system, because at any point in history, you've had people that have learned how to thrive in that broken system. To Randy's point, Bitcoin is one way that people can learn to thrive. In my world, health inside of a broken health system, you can find ways to learn how to thrive. So if you focus on the thing that you, A, are ready to change, and B, can control, there's a way to move your life forward.
Boy, that sounds awful Pollyanna to me, but
it's not. And I have all the research to show. I'm publishing papers about it. I have data about that. I can walk you through and tell you that it's not Pollyanna. You can find small enough wins for people where they have things they can control. It's not Pollyanna at all. Like you tell me the circumstance and I can help someone find the way through it. Now, it might not be easy, but people have more agency. When they give up their agency to a larger system, that's a choice too.
But when you take something like Bitcoin, most people don't even know this is a problem. If you go out on the street and ask people how much are we in debt, and just last week we hit 40 trillion in debt, right? They don't know that. And if they do, they've never really stopped to think, what does 40 trillion mean? Like, the enormity of that number breaks their brain. It breaks my brain, right? And I've thought about it and I'm good at math. It's like people aren't going to work or even know that they have to solve a problem unless you can convince them there is a problem or they understand it, or at least have a basic understanding.
And that's where people fix problems that are hurting them, right? When you have people in the world, and there's lots of people who are trying to inflict pain so that people change behavior versus discovering pain and helping people get to their desired outcome, like, this is a part of the problem, right? We're in a world where lots of people are trying to kind of inflict pain so that you want to change, versus discovering what's important to people and where those motivators are. I mean, I did a whole TED talk on this. Like, you find what someone wants to change, you get an expert plan, so you have a grounded, sober plan, not just a Pollyanna plan, and then you help people work together to those ends in very small steps, and things can get done. But I don't think we're going to fix 40 trillion in debt. To Anthony's point, a smaller part is we got to fix spending, and then you've got to fix it in smaller chunks. And you just have to keep breaking down, these seemingly intractable problems into smaller problems until the problem becomes tractable or solvable versus insolvable or intractable. And so that's how you address these things. But when you just throw your hands in the air, That's a position. It's not a position that I happen to agree with, but it's not Pollyanna either. You just have to keep unwinding the ball of twine, one knot at a time. And that means you have to work really hard to find the end first. And it can be really hard to find the end of that ball of twine. And for some people in the world, it is a way messier ball of twine than for others.
Well,
So
for
optimist,
most
yes.
people, for most people, yeah, for most of the population of the world, they are unable to participate in the solution to the problem. They're unable to, to save money and buy Bitcoin because they don't have the money to do that. They don't have the political control to elect people that are going to be fiscally responsible and make the hard decisions. And my fear is Randy's right that eventually there's going to be an economic collapse worldwide in many ways, because we're not the only ones who are overspending. Japan is out of control. Europe's out of control. England's out of control. It goes on and on and on and on with the burden of debt on all of these countries. There will be an economic collapse. And the only people that will benefit from that are people in the top 50% or more who own some Bitcoin.
No, it's
and then
top
what?
10% or more. But I think that
Might
goes
be
back
that, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I think, and look, I think the problem is this isn't one problem for all of mankind, right? Like there's the problems for, my children, which are different than the problems for people that don't have any money, different than the problems who do have money, but choose to spend more than they earn. Like there's a series of issues. Back to my ball of twine, right? It's not a problem, right? It's a whole bunch of separate problems caused by, like this $40 trillion thing doesn't cause a problem. It causes a cascade of problems. And that problem shows up differently for different people. That problem is what it is for me. That's very different than what it is for, people who don't have my means. I think that's the first part of it, is like, you've got to enter into the problem where that one person is and handle it from their perspective, but it's not a single problem. And handling it systemically is the long-term answer, but it's not the right answer for most individuals today who need to do something about it today.
Let's talk about where else this is showing up in the world. Let's start with AI. What would you guys say as an example of somebody so the frontier labs, what do we hear from Dario and Sam and a lot of those people, right? Positive or negative?
Well, Dario is the America's greatest doomer, in terms of, he said a year or so ago that 50% of all entry-level jobs are going to be eliminated
in a year.
In a year, yeah. And he released a version of, I think it was Mythos. It was Mythos, that they had to pull back because it had vulnerability. It had the ability to hack just about any system on the planet. No one knows if that's actually true or not, but nonetheless, he's a doomer. Yeah, he's a doomer. He's scaring people. And now, we can get into details about why, but that's not important for this discussion.
I just don't know if that's pessimism or marketing, Anthony, and trying to generate.
That's why I didn't want to get into.
So you're going to get into a moat. So I think that's probably not like that. That's probably off topic for like optimism versus pessimism, because now you're talking about moving consumer sentiment, which is a different issue.
But but I agree that I think that it is maybe even beyond marketing. He's shooting for regulatory capture. But let's talk about that negative message. There's a reason more people would rather have a nuclear power plant by their house than a data center. And there's something like, 70, 80, 85% of people are against data centers. They're against power. I mean, it's insane that all of the pushback and all of the FUD about the water usage, right? People don't understand that.
FUD would be fear, uncertainty, doubt, since Randy loves acronyms.
There you go. You got me. That's well played. All of that is out. I didn't even know what it meant, by the way. It's good. Now I know what the acronym means. But all of that doomerism is making their job harder. People don't want the data centers. They don't want the power plants. They're it's creating a society that's scared that they're going to take their jobs, and instead of creating allies. And if we look at Elon on the other side, he talks about this abundant future and everybody's going to have their own personal robots, and the robots are going to make things and they're going to provide things, and we're going to have unlimited energy, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's a completely different approach, right? I would consider Elon to be really, really optimistic, and I would Dario in particular, I would consider to be really pessimistic.
I think
You know,
one group is trying to get regulatory moats built for them, and one group doesn't worry about regulatory moats because they have more of a free market bias, which is, again, we're away from optimism and pessimism, right? So optimism and pessimism is like, if I'm inside of a broken system and I'm generally optimistic, I believe that I can go find a path forward. Even in the darkest of times, there's a path forward. By the way, the vast majority of wealth is created in downturns in an economy. Like that's a part of our economic cycle. If you look at technology, when these things have wiped out job categories, other job categories have opened up. And there are people who've not chosen to retool or not been able to retool their careers. But the reality is the society grows through it, and the individuals can get left behind, or they can choose to kind of move through it. I want to make sure, like, if this is tales of abundance, like, there is opportunity at every downturn. There is opportunity for defensive pessimists. There is opportunity for planning optimists. But pessimists who don't plan doesn't work out very well. Optimists who don't plan, it doesn't work out very well. And so if you want abundance, the real lesson here is, what can you control? What are the obstacles you personally face? What are the plans you personally make? And what can you do about it today? And if you can't do anything about the system today, then start to do things today so that if you want to impact the system, you can start to impact the system down the line. Like there's ways to grow into that for sure, right? So they want to take care of their individual selves, their families, their communities, the system more broadly. And those things can all be stair-stepped into. But the whole throw your hands up and we're like, fuck it, the system's broke. Like, I don't think that's a responsible message, especially for a group that's, purported to give tales of abundance.
yeah, there's a world out there, a world of people that are using optimism as a tool for good. And Randy mentioned Elon, and there are others that are doing some really good things. I mentioned Jim Farley from Ford. He's revolutionizing that company by literally being optimistic about the future and the things that he's trying to do inside that company to make it a better company. But I know this is about abundance, but it just has to be said. The people that are pessimistic about data centers and the AI guys running up electric bills, they're actually victims in a way, because they're being manipulated by the pessimists who are using this information or the fear of these things as a political means, whipping people into a frenzy over data centers and Medicare for all and whatever other thing that they want to do on both sides of the aisle is politically expedient for them to retain power or to gain even more power.
Well, there's that. There's international players that we could say maybe are a part of that. That's way more nefarious than what you're talking about. There's the oversimplification, so I can keep power as a politician storyline. There's the I don't understand it, so I'm going to spew what I'm hearing somewhere else. There's so many storylines, and to all those storylines, Anthony, to all of them, what I would say is this. Everybody in America, at least, we get a lot more choices than most people. It's like, what do you control versus what don't you control? I recognize other cultures don't have as much of that available to them, and that's not, I mean, we can certainly get into that in a separate episode. But, this is where I think the through line for me on this episode that I didn't realize when we did the prep for this episode was that planning is the real thing. Like having a sober view of where you are and where you want to go and how to have a plan. And then, from a cognitive behavioral perspective, once you know what you want to do and you start paying attention for other people that have that belief systems, it's like when you buy a purple car, the next day you recognize how many purple cars are on the road, but you don't recognize it the day before. Like that's a thing. If you want success, look at the people who are navigating it successfully. And if the criteria is I want to have success with a certain level of ethic, a certain set of morality, those people also exist. You can mirror all of the criteria you're looking for if you're willing to look for it versus being a naysayer.
Also, one of the things that we haven't talked about is pretty much everybody would rather be around positive people than negative people, right? Like, being around negative people is draining on your energy level. Some of this is the 5 that you surround yourself with, but just being a better member of society and spreading abundance, if you're just out with a smile and a positive attitude, I feel like you're adding more abundance to the world simply by doing that. You don't have to be Elon Musk trying to go to Mars or trying to solve the newest AI math problems. If you just go out and are generally a happy person that other people want to be around, who knows what impact you can have, second and third level, just, spreading it forward.
That's a great message. In the spirit of abundance, sometimes, we get overwhelmed with, the doomerism. But to John's point, if you to your point, if you remain upbeat and confident, and then you put together a plan and then expect to have setbacks, but not let them turn you off, you can make a better life for yourself. You can take that one step forward. You're not going to go from, a college graduate with a $50,000 job to Elon Musk in any, 20-minute interval. It's a journey. It could take years. It could take decades. It may never get there, but being positive is such a great influence on society in so many ways, and on yourself from a health perspective, from a relationship perspective. It all fits together. There's just no downside to having an optimistic view. Again, not Pollyanna, an optimistic view with a plan. There's just no downside to that.
All right, that's as positive as we get, Anthony. We are locking that in. We're going to go to break on that. Download, subscribe, follow us. If you don't follow us on YouTube, go on there, subscribe, follow us again on social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. We will talk to you after the break for the Abundance Briefing.
Awesome. Here at Tales of Abundance, we know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our 5 F's. For me, taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. Along with a good night's sleep and exercise, you need the right balance of nutrients for good health. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit, takes less than a minute. It's formulated with all the vitamins and minerals you need, including probiotics, designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. And if you want to try it, with our affiliate link, you'll receive a free AG1 sampler plus vitamins D and K2 with your welcome kit. That's when you first subscribe. That's a $72 value. So do it now. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales and get started with a product that will take care of a lot of your needs first thing in the morning.
Well, gentlemen, we're going to start out with the Abundance Briefing, a little bit of a abundance blocker that will have a solution, but $40 trillion in debt. The U.S. just passed last week. When you hear 40 trillion, what is that? Does that even register with you? What do you even think when you hear a number that big?
Well, I've been around a while, and I remember in the 70s, a billboard going up on Route 1 outside of Boston, where they were tracking the federal debt. And I remember when it went over $10 billion in the 70s. People were worried about it then. We obviously haven't taken any action to slow it down, because I don't know what the multiple is of that. But here we are at 40 trillion. It's been a problem for a long, long time. And here we are.
But John, 40 trillion, does that number even, we hear 1, we hear 10, we hear 100, it means something. Does 40 trillion even mean anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about understanding the relationship, right? Because how much tax revenue do we bring in a year?
About 5 trillion.
I thought it was closer to 7, but yeah, it's less than 10, right? And so
no, we spend it's 5.5 trillion, and our budget is about 7.5 trillion, about 2 trillion more, but then we spend another $0.5 trillion to $1 trillion off budget, where they'd throw us in jail if we did our accounting like that, but the U.S. government doesn't count that in the budget.
Yeah, that's like, if you just relate that to if someone made $50,000 a year, right, and they had $400,000 in debt, that's pretty problematic, right? Because you have a hard time paying interest on that. That means $10,000 in interest payments, right? It's a pretty big number.
It's not just making 50,000; it's making 50,000 and spending more like 70 or 75,000 while you have 400,000.
And having repeating bills of 60,000, right? So you have $60,000 in repeatable bills. You have $10,000 in debt service. or whatever the number. There's and this is where I think, the Buffett amendment was a really interesting thought experiment that, was never really proposed. But Warren Buffett talked about, like, if you couldn't balance the budget as a House or senator, a member of Congress, you wouldn't be eligible for reelection. And there was a number of other things he talked about as well. Like, the House and the Senate had to have the same health care as Medicaid or whatever it was. And I just think that, the question is, are we going to hold our leaders accountable? And so, and this is where I can't remember who said it, but there's a famous, writer that wrote about, like, things cease to become democratic in any way when the majority understands they can vote the money out of somebody else's hands. Effectively, that's what's happening.
Yeah, it's the interest payments you're talking about, by the way. They have now crossed $1.4 trillion a year. 1.4 trillion. And I was asking how big a trillion is. One of my favorite things with this, 1,000,000 seconds, okay, is about 11 and a half days. Basically a week and a half for 1,000,000 seconds. 1,000,000,000 seconds, to think how much it is 31.7 years. We go from 11 days to 31 years. A trillion seconds, 31,700 years. Almost 32,000 years for a trillion seconds. That's how big a trillion is. And what's worse is we're paying that debt, and people in Washington can just actively print that. Well, Treasury Secretary Bessent came out last week and has also started saying we're doing bond buybacks. Well, everybody thinks of QE and printing money, and this isn't exactly QE, because QE comes when the Fed is buying the mortgages or buying the bonds or buying whatever. This is the Treasury Secretary, but in either case, it's the U.S. government. And what that tells you is there is not enough demand for our debt. And when this happened last week, despite Bessent came out and said, we're going to start buying. Supply and demand, the thought was the interest rate's going to go down. And that's not what happened. The market is coming back, and the market is saying, we don't want your debt. Not everybody. It's not like nobody wants it. But in order to sell the U.S. government or give the U.S. government money, people want a higher interest rate despite our own government taking away some of the supply. Like, that doesn't end well. And interest rates, again, if we're at 1.4 trillion, the debt's growing. I mean, it's going up every 100 days, basically. Right now, we're adding $1 trillion. And it's been happening, getting worse and worse, regardless if there's a Democrat or Republican. And the interest rate is only going to go up. Boy, people should do a lot of research on Japan, like what's happening in Japan right now, and their debt is out of control. And we are just letting them, because Japan is the biggest holder of U.S. securities, and we don't want them to dump that back on the market. We are basically printing money and giving it to Japan so they don't have to sell dollars. I mean, that's a whole topic unto its own.
The abundance angle here is, like, what do you do in this set of circumstances if you're concerned about this? And I think people who are paying attention to it rationally are concerned. The question becomes, what do you do about it? Like, what's the trade? What's the thing? What's the professional movement that you make? And it's a fair question for people.
You buy assets, right? You buy things that last. For me, that's Bitcoin. I think gold works. I think even buying oil, buying companies are a version of buying assets.
Yeah, real estate. There's all kinds.
Yeah, let's step back. Let's step back from the doomerism here for a second and think about what Elon said. Okay, go down that path. Everyone has their view of the future. If you're DSA, you have a view. If you're a MAGA, you have a view. If you're in between, you have a view. If you take Bessent and Elon's view, they believe you can grow your economy out of this situation, right? You can, through productivity gains, you can create a bigger economy. The bigger economy will will generate revenue that exceeds the expense. And that's the way out of this. And frankly, I hope they're right, because whether you have 50 or 200 rational people in Washington who believe we've got to do something, that amount won't overpower the people who are going to want to continue to spend.
And Anthony, that's not really what Elon said. Elon, if you remember during the last election, he was all about Doge. He was all about cutting. He was all about controlling spending. He was going to cut $1 trillion here and a few $100 billion here. And then he went to Washington and found out that was much harder than catching a rocket with a pair of chopsticks and gave up on it. But he only went to we can grow our way out when his real solution was to cut spending and cut the debt and get rid of the debt. He saw this as a real problem. When he realized that was going to be impossible in the current political system, he then pivoted to, well, the only other solution is to grow our way out.
We've got an economist on. Let's turn this into an episode and let's keep going.
Anyway, buy real things that they can't print. And I would just spend time educating yourself. By the way, real estate is great. And John, you've talked about international real estate, but historically, when a money collapses in a society, and Berlin and before Nazi Germany is a great example, real estate does not always do very well and doesn't keep up with gold historically as a much better place. And I just think Bitcoin is a much better version of gold. But real estate is better than a piece of paper that they can print out of nowhere. Let's move on, and we'll have chances to re-energize this at 41 trillion and 42 trillion and 43 trillion. But I would start doing something now to protect me and my family.
And let's get a whole episode in that thing too, man. This is a great topic.
John, let's talk about balance and exercise versus the bench press. What's more important, balance or the bench press?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about balance, you're not talking about life balance, you're talking about physical balance here. And so aging, the things you need for aging are strength, balance, and mobility. And the reason they talk about balance being so important, more people die as a result of complications from falling in older age than we talk about. Like, it's just not a topic that's talked about kind of widely in society, but it certainly is talked about between doctors and aging populations. Like Richard Simmons, the fitness guru of the 70s and 80s, he died as a complication to a fall. Right. And so balance, mobility, which mobility leads to better balance, and then strength, which leads to a whole lot of good things as you age, those are things that matter a ton. As people start to think about age, like with my trainer, even in my early 50s, like we work on primarily those three things: balance, mobility, and strength. My trainer has me doing gymnastic, not routines in the way you do them like in the Olympics, but like I do handstands for balance. He has me doing forward somersaults occasionally. I do balance exercise on, 1 foot on a bench and like all types of these types of things to actively work on improving balance. And I'm, fairly athletic as it is, but it's a really important set of exercises. I think balance, mobility, and strength, if you're thinking about aging and you want to have longevity, those are 3 really important criteria for exercise.
Anthony, are you doing handstands?
No handstands, but we can't have this discussion without talking about the strength of your cardiovascular system and your VO2 max and the ability for you to absorb oxygen. It's really, this is an and discussion,
Yep.
All these things work together. The one that bothers me the most is the ability to get off the floor. There's an exercise where you stand up, cross your ankles over each other, try to sit down on the floor, and then try to get up.
Without using your hands.
Without using your hands. Everybody should go try that and then start working on getting better at it. I'm in pretty good shape. I'm a pretty strong guy. I cannot do that. And I'm working on it. I'm doing some other things that are a bit embarrassing, like going to Pilates classes and things like that to try to work on all this stuff. But yeah, all of these things are really, really important. Walking speed. I read a study the other day that there's a correlation between heart disease and the speed at which you walk. And it doesn't mean you have to be a race walker, but I guess if you're a lumberer, someone who just kind of goes at 1 or 2 miles an hour versus someone who walks at 3, 4, 2.5 to 3.5 to 4 miles per hour. There's a big difference in all-cause mortality between those 2 groups of people. And again, I don't know how big the study was. I don't know if it was a randomly controlled study. Just again, we run into a lot of words as we chase longevity, and I read that the other day as well.
I will say this though, like the baseline for our patients in our medical practice is 150 movements of just regular old lumber walking without stopping, for 10 minutes. So it's like if it's 10 minutes 3 times a day or 30 minutes all at once, don't have to break a sweat, don't have to breathe hard, just get moving 150 minutes a week. Better if it's after eating than before. But like even just a little bit makes a huge difference. Yeah. I was on vacation with a guy who's in his, mid 70s, and I was watching him get on the floor and get off the floor like he was a 30-year-old father. And like, it was amazing to watch. And it was like new life goals. Like I was just totally inspired. So I was hiking in Europe several years ago, and I watched people who were probably 80, 85 years old that could have run circles around me. It's all possible.
All right. My takeaway from this is be like a ninja. Be like a ninja and start jumping on buildings and doing your ninja workout. All right, John.
Parkour.
The next one is right up your alley as well. A study 200,000 people in 22 countries confirmed your friends are your best medicine. And I know this one hits home to you. Talk us through this.
I mean, the three of us have been talking about this for more than 10 or 15 years, right? Like lonesomeness or loneliness is an epidemic according to the Surgeon General. And where, in 40, 50 years ago, men in particular purportedly had a dozen people they could talk to about any level of intimate subject where it was bothering them. Today, that number is less than 2, according to kind of more recent data that I still am looking for, like the scientific studies. These are more anecdotal, heuristic things. But if you talk to people around, it all bears out. Like people are talking to less people. They're not talking about the layers of intimacy. And when I say intimacy, there's like the how's the weather stuff that's followed by like getting into like how you think about things. Then you get into like the opinions about things. But there's, how's the weather? There's the facts, there's the opinions. Then you get into like feelings and then hopes and dreams. Then you get into like fears. Like we don't talk about that stuff as much as we could or should. And we don't have the skill sets to listen like we used to. And we don't have the patience to wait 6 hours to process information and then come back to the topic once the information's processed and we're not dealing with it in the height of the emotional energy. And I think these things impact our health and well-being mentally and physically both.
Yeah, in my life journey, what I see has happened is it doesn't appear that there's as many community gathering places. Growing up on the East Coast anyway, there were the Elks, the Sons of Italy, the Veterans the veterans used to
VFW,
get together.
Veterans of Foreign War.
VFWs.
Yep.
There was, I think, a higher proportion of people worshipped than do today in wherever they are. There were much more communal gatherings, which, from inside that, there might be 300 people in the church, but you probably had 3 to 10 acquaintances of a sort. And the same thing at these gathering clubs. And they don't seem, the Masons are still out there. There's a VFW hall down the street from me. I don't know that it's in practice the same thing. They seem to rent the hall out more than they gather there. And that's part of this. And I don't know if this is true in all countries and so forth. It's true in my experience, a survey of one. But I remember my uncles and my friends, my father's friends, they seem to always be doing something together. And I don't know if it's our society that has taken us into these individual holes. I mean, sports is still there where dads and moms take their kids on, to soccer and so forth. So
but Anthony, people move. People move around more. Jobs move you around. People change jobs more often. People change jobs and move cities more often. It's easier to move from state to state, city to city, country, county to county. So it's much easier to pick up stakes and go, right? Where that used to be limited, I think, 60, 70 years ago, that was common amongst military families, but maybe not amongst a lot of other people. And if you did move once, you stayed in a career for decades. That's a lot different today. I think a lot of the societal fabric is different than it used to be also.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good, we should do some research on that. I mean, why would people want to leave a community that they're really tied to? I know I did. I mean, I personally ran away from family and friends because I didn't like where I was. But, what was it the ease of moving the fact that, opportunity present itself in another. I have friends that haven't moved a mile from where they grew up. A lot of well, most of them are dying now, but they never left. And I'm sure, Randy, in your town where you grew up, there are people that never left. Southern California, a lot of reason not to leave. John, where you grew up, I don't know. That's a good one. I'd like to prove that people move more easily or more than they used to. Interesting question.
A question worth answering, and we might come back to that in a future episode. We got two more quick ones to get through here. The first one, we have trillions of tons of clean fuel that's buried underground. From the MIT Technology Review here just a couple days ago, they found that the U.S. Geological Survey estimates trillions of tons of hydrogen exist underground. Again, another clean energy we've talked about. Solar and nuclear and all these different things and different batteries. I think it's exciting that there is more and more and more, just we're finding other alternative energy. And I'm a yes and guy, right? Like we should be pursuing all of them to create abundance in the world. And then the last one, actually doing research for this, I watched this movie. The Cully Hill Boys is the first ever AI-made feature filmed with licensed celebrity faces. And it had, the only person I knew was Rampage Jackson, who was a UFC guy, but evidently there was another UFC person and a couple of influencers that they put in this movie, but they weren't actors. They just took their presence and built the movie. And I got to tell you, the movie's not that bad. I just thought it would suck. And it doesn't. It's sort of a Guy Ritchie type movie. They're English mobsters, like they're these rappers, and it's a crime thing, but it's absolutely watchable. And my intention was really just to watch the first 5 or 10 minutes. And I started while I was working on something, but I just kept it on in the background and kept watching it. If that's where we are right now, by the way, here's the part that's really interesting. $2 million. They used $1 million of AI compute and spent another $1 million on licensing and other things. They made a 2-hour movie for $2 million. Like that, and it's the worst it's ever going to be, and it's watchable right now. Have you guys seen any of these or looked at any of these full-length things?
No, but I did talk.
Go ahead, John.
I did talk to a guy who's a kind of known personality in California who makes films, and they were talking about all the different work they could do with AI to like have all the different production workflow going through, and how they had a backlog of some huge number of ideas that they just could never get to before AI, and now they're producing storyboards and all these things, and it's coming through so fast. And so I don't know they've had like fully produced films yet necessarily, but what they're seeing is that all the backlog is now actually being handled and moved. And I think, look, the way that computers impacted the world, the way the internet impacted the world, like we're seeing it again. And so people are going to make the change or they're not.
Yeah, let's keep this a little lighter. I don't see a difference between this and the evolution or de-evolution of music. Most of the music today that's being produced is synthesized in a room with overdubbing and, electronic instruments as opposed to a steel guitar or an electric guitar and drums and piano and so forth. It's really AI before it was AI. This is a natural evolution of what's to come. And because it's so easy and so inexpensive, I think you're going to see a lot more of it. I think the statistics on Spotify were it's over 50% of the music being uploaded now is AI music. It may actually be much higher than that. This horse is out of the barn, so good luck distinguishing it from anything else. As long as it's entertaining, and it can hold my attention for 30 to 120 minutes, I don't really care.
I think what's coming is there's going to be a day where you, instead of going on Netflix and searching through, that stuff might still be on there, but it will learn your personality, right? And what do you like? And it will be able to create a show specific for you. And you may like a different type of hero than I like. You may have a different type of love interest, or you want more comedy or different type of comedy. And I think that personalized entertainment is coming, just like it is with a lot of other things. And I think that's pretty exciting, right? Because
I don't know about that. And the reason I don't know about it is you normally aren't watching this stuff on your own. And depending on, the different personalities, is this going to create a more insular and universe where, okay, honey, you go watch your show. I'm going to put my headphones on and I'm going to watch and listen to mine. I don't know if that's good. I don't know if
it's a challenge for the news cycle, right? Like the one danger we got to be careful of, and this is not something that needs to be regulated away, but like what happens when news programming becomes your own personal echo chamber? And it's all about having you feel good versus getting you really well informed. Like I got into an intense conversation with my older son this last week. He was home from college and we had this intense conversation. And the whole point I was making with him was like, hey man, you just need to hear both sides of the argument. And it's clear to me that you don't understand the other side because of the way that you're arguing. So until you go learn the other side, it just sounds uneducated to me. And so I will respect your opinion more if you actually come. And he went and did the research, was like, changed it. And to his credit, he helped change some of my positions too. And we had a deep conversation on what it means to have strong convictions loosely held. And so I do worry that with AI that's personalized to people, we run the risk of much more thick echo chambers. So we'll just be careful of that.
I just want to watch a show that I like, right?
Yeah.
So to your point, Anthony, there's things Julie and I that she likes that I don't like and vice versa, but we both really like historical dramas, right? And things that it's entertaining, but we also learn a little bit of history at the same time. I would love to have it make historical dramas on the things that, I find interesting, for example, that I could watch it whenever I want.
We never controlled content, right? It got created by Scorsese and whoever. We don't control content now when it's created by a couple of strokes on a keyboard. So what's the difference?
Listeners, thank you for spending this time with us. Until next week, go out and spread a little abundance.